What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Dev Marketer channel. I am continuing on our series on Laravel 5.4 new features. We're going to continue now with part 6 of the series, where we look at some new stuff coming to Blade. So, Blade is the templating engine for Laravel. It's what we use to basically create our HTML documents, and there's a lot of power that's been coming to Blade. We have things like sections and partials, and in the last edition, we got things like stacks and all sorts of great stuff. And now we've got a new one called components. And components is pretty cool because components is actually kind of modeled after the concept of components from Vue. So if you guys are familiar with Vue.js components, this is basically a very similar way to create Vue.js, create components similar to how Vue.js creates them, but we can create them using Blade, PHP, HTML, all that kind of stuff. Okay, let me show you guys how it works. It's actually very intuitive and very simple. It's easier than I thought it would be. So let's just show you how to do it. All right, so we're gonna go over here. We're gonna create a new project. We already have a project, so let's just go into it. So I gotta be in the terminal. Atom, period. I'm so tired. I am so tired. Okay, so let's get into this and get done so I can go to sleep. So let's see. We want to go. Let's first of all start by creating a view, or not a view. Yeah, view. Resources, views. Oh, we got one view. Welcome.blade.php. Okay, this is the default view that comes with Laravel. Let's clean it up a little bit. Let's just get rid of the styling, like that. And what we're going to do here is we're going to just kind of kill this, and we'll just take this URL. What we're going to do is we're going to pull in the CSS, okay? So you guys remember I showed you guys this in a previous video. We can do something called mix app.css. And, well, we got to do CSS/app.css. Anyway, this is going to pull in our compiled CSS document that comes from our resources and our Sass, right? So this compiled version will get placed into our CSS as the CSS/app.css. And the cool thing is by default, it will pull in all of the Bootstrap stuff. So we're going to use Bootstrap for styling in this tutorial. And so I'm going to go ahead and do a quick compile on this because I can't remember if I have or not. We can just look at the CSS file. Yeah, I definitely haven't. So we're going to run a quick compile. Oh, wait, maybe we have. Oh, gosh, this is dirty. Pull quote. Oh, it looks like we actually have. So, yeah, we have. This is all Bootstrap stuff. Okay, so we actually have the Bootstrap then already. It's already compiled. We can do one just for good measure. Let's just go ahead and run it. npm run, we'll just run a dev and let this compile real quick. So anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to use this Bootstrap styling to show you guys how components works, okay? So the concept of components is components are reusable elements that you might use throughout your application, and it's a way for you basically to not have to redo a lot of boilerplate code, and you can create these components and fill in the different elements of the components in a more dynamic way. So let me show you guys some examples of this. Let's start, because a lot of you guys use CSS frameworks. So let's just go and take a look at some of these. So the most popular one is Get Bootstrap. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at that one. And if you come over here to CSS, you guys know how this works. There's obviously boilerplate code for a lot of this stuff. Let's actually go to components real quick. And it's ironic they're both called components, but I mean, that's the core concept here is you have components. So for example, you could make a component for an icon, right? And then you could pass in the variable that represents the icon name, like erase, right? You could maybe pass in this name to a component and it would generate all the HTML. So you just do component icon, and then you can pass in the item that you want to do, and it would automatically generate all that stuff. And that's the idea behind components, is the idea that, and I'll show you how to make one here, but it's the idea that you can basically take these reusable elements of code, these kind of boilerplate chunks of code, fill in the necessary information, but you don't have to retype that code every time, which is pretty awesome when you start building big applications, especially things like admin panels and stuff like that, where you have alerts and tables and things like that. If you can just pass in the relevant information and not clutter your Blade files with all that code that you're typing over and over again, it can make your life a lot easier. Okay, and it can also help with consistency because across your application, if you're styling, say you style all your alerts to look exactly the same way, down the road you decide to make a change to it. Well, making a change to it in one place where that component, all that HTML boilerplate for that component is, serviced, making one change there will propagate throughout your whole application. So some more examples would be, and the one we're going to be doing today is actually going to be alerts. Okay, I think this is a really easy one. So this is a perfect example. We're going to basically take the code here that it takes to create an alert, and we're going to just autofill it in so that basically you could pull from an airbag, or you could pull from some sort of some flash variables that you might have with your success messages. You could basically just pull from that, plug in the stuff from the flash variables, and it just generates the code without you having to have that chunk of code stuck in an if statement and stuff, cluttering up your... Okay, so this is just one example, but you could do this with any reusable element in your website. You could do this with tabs. You could do this with panels. You could do this with modals, like pop-ups. You could do it with lots of different things where you're reusing an element. You could do it with a Jumbotron. So you could have a Jumbotron component, and then you just pass in the title, and you pass in maybe the content for the description, and then that's it. And it will generate all the code necessary for your Jumbotron. Got it? So pretty easy stuff. So let's go ahead and do it. In fact, that would be a really good one. Let's go ahead and do a Jumbotron. Okay, so let's go ahead and copy this Jumbotron. Let's copy this here. And let's go back over to our project. And what we're going to do here is just create, let's go ahead and kill all this stuff. So we don't need this. We don't need this. We don't need this. We don't need that. Okay, so let's go ahead and kill all this. And what we're going to do is let's just go ahead and create a component. So component. Okay, so we create a component. You're going to, it's very similar to like a section. You basically start the name with component, you give the component a name, and then you're going to end the component. So in this case, let's call our component Jumbotron. All right. And let's just go ahead and we're going to create this behind the scenes before we worry about filling in the information. So I'm going to go ahead and save this component. And what it's going to look is it's going to look for a blade file now called jumbotron.blade.php. Again, this is very similar to include or section or anything like that. It's very, very similar. So it's going to be looking for jumbotron.blade.php here inside of our views folder. Okay, so it's going to go to the views and look for that. So let's go create a file, call it, as you would expect, jumbotron.blade.php. Okay, just like any blade file, this is going to, you just start like any other blade file here. So inside of here, let's go ahead and paste our code for the Jumbotron. And here we have hello world. We've got some, let's just do some lorem ipsum and a learn more button, okay? So that's all we got. Let's go ahead. So inside of here, you can see we call it. We have an end component. We don't have anything in the middle. We don't need to. And then over here in the blade file, we have all this information. So let's go ahead and load this welcome.blade.php into the browser. So come over here. We're going to open a new tab. Go to Laravel 5.4.dev. And sure enough, I need to put a container, but we got the whole thing here. So let's just throw this in a container. Well, let's throw all of this in container. Okay, there we go. So let's come back over here. Perfect. Okay, so now there we go. There we got our project and we got the Jumbotron. So that's really, really easy. You can see how much we cleaned up the code because all we had to do was call that component. It makes it really, really nice. Now imagine if you had the alerts and stuff like that. You would just have to call component and then alert, right? So it's pretty easy. Well, the problem is obviously you want to be able to customize what's inside of it. So let's talk about customizing inside of components. And that's where slots come in. All right, so we can create these elements inside of components called slots. So if we create a slot, just like a section, we're going to call it, let's call it the title, right? And this is going to, here's where we're going to insert a variable of information, a variable of data, and we're going to pass that now into the component, okay? So a component can have as many slots as necessary, and every single slot gets passed in as a variable into the main component where you can then pull it out and use it, all right? So let's create this. So slot title, this is going to be the title for our slot, and then, oops, I'm all over the place tonight, and then we'll just do end slot. And inside of here, let's say, and let's see, we think we had hello world in here. So let's say, welcome dev marketers. And that's going to be our title. Let's come back to our Jumbotron. And how do we get it to actually output here inside where the title would be? Well, it's pretty easy. You would output it just like any other variable. So you just pass it in with title and just make sure that the name of the variable corresponds with the name of the slot, and it will automatically pull it in. So here we just pull in the title. Let's go ahead and save this. And you can see again, all we're doing, we've got our component, we created a slot named title. This is the value of that slot. And then we pulled in the value of the slot over here using a title variable in the header. Okay, so we would expect now a Jumbotron with our customized header. So back over to browser, let's refresh. And here it says, well, welcome dev marketers, right? So it's working. So this is pretty cool. Now, the next thing you could do is you could go ahead and create a body. So let's go and do that, or a description. Let's do another slot. And we're going to say description. And that's where we would type in some long description. Okay, so there I went ahead, just created a custom description. And over in our Jumbotron, we just need to customize this paragraph tag to output our description. So we're going, we got to put a $sign in front of it. Description. Did I call it description? Just double check that. Yeah, description. Okay. Now let's go back over here and refresh. Sure enough, you're getting the content. That shouldn't come as a surprise. Okay, so there we go. So now we can customize this. And if you wanted to have multiple of these, multiple jumbos on a page is odd, but we could definitely do it. Component, Jumbotron, and then you can just pull in any necessary information that you have. Slot, and this will be our title, and this one will just say okay, and then we'll do another slot with the description, and we will pass in Lorem Ipsum this time, okay? So there we go. We pass it in, refresh. Now you get two. Obviously, we've created two instances of the same component. We didn't need to recreate this element. And if we wanted to change something on this, so let's say we wanted to change this to background color red, and go ahead and save that and refresh. It's obviously going to be reflected on both of them because we only have to change the code in one place and it reflects all the components. And this would not only work on the one page, but throughout your entire application. And that's some of the value of components. It makes managing these reusable elements easier. And again, on things like admin panels and stuff like that, where you're reusing a lot of the same components throughout the entire project, components will be a nice element to have because not only is it going to clean up your actual source code in your Blade files, not only does it clean that up, but it centralizes those reusable components. So if you want that same graph to look the same throughout all of the, even though the data might be different, you want it to look the same throughout the entire project, or those tabs or those alerts or whatever components you're using, you can actually do that now. Have the code for that graph in one place, repeated only one time, not repeated at all, just used one time. And if you ever need to change it, you can change it in one place, and anything that was using that component throughout your entire application it will get updated automatically. So that's some of the cool thing with components, all right? So let's go ahead. The last thing I want to show you guys, something that's actually really cool about it, is that every single component actually does have a default slot, okay? And we call this slot. So slot is a reserved variable now. You do not want to call any variable slot in even if it's not a component. You don't want to use the term slot, okay? So just be careful of that. But now slot is a reserved variable, and anytime we call this reference for slot, it's going to pass in any information inside of that component block that is not tied to a slot, okay? So let me explain that. Let's come back over to welcome. And let's say that we just want this description, since this is kind of the main content and it could be lengthy, we don't want to tie it into a specific slot. So what we can do is we can actually get rid of the slot here. So the only slot we have is this title slot, and then everything else is obviously not tied to a slot, right? So it's just content inside of this component. So any content here in any component, any content that's not tied into a slot like this is, will be passed into the variable as just this slot variable, okay? So the component will always have access to this, and this basically represents any information that's not in another slot. And this makes it really easy this is a perfect example. If you were doing a modal or something and you want your main content, you could not have to tie your main content to a slot. You just put it inside the component outside of all the other slots, and it's gonna work. So it's kind of like your default information. Let's go do this real quick over here and just, there we go. And so now we should expect obviously the same thing. Just make sure your variable here says slot. Let's come over here and refresh. And you can see it's pulling in that data once again, just like as it was before, but we didn't need to define a slot specifically. We used the default slot handler, okay, which is cool. Last thing, I'll show you, just this should go without knowing, but you can actually do any sort of, these are just normal blade files. So you can do anything you normally would do with any sort of blade or section or anything like that. So let's do another slot on one of these. Let's do a slot that says button, okay? And then the button says, let's see, click like. All right, so that's the value we want inside of our button. But I'm going to go ahead and leave there's no slot for button in here. Well, what we can do then, we can go into Jumbotron, and you can see this last element here is a button. So what we can do is we can use anything we would normally use with Blade, like an if statement, and we can say, hey, if button, we can do if is set maybe. Oops. If is set, then we'll go ahead and put this in. So we know that if there's a value for button, if we passed a slot in for button, then we're going to go ahead and output a button. And let's go ahead and customize the name of the button with whatever the value was here. And if not, we just obviously won't have a button. So notice in our components here, we passed a button in, a slot for button in this first one, but not in the second one. So over in our project, we would expect what we just see here. We see that we customize the name for button. It now says click like. Okay, that's the custom button value. And it has a button. And this one just didn't have a button. Okay, pretty cool. Another thing to keep in mind before we go is if you wanted to do something like, let's say we wanted to have a button anyway, but maybe if there was no value, we just do the default of learn more. Okay, let's do it that way. So what we would do in this case is we're going to have a button, so we don't need an if statement. So we would do it kind of the way we did before. But when we come to call this, just keep in mind that there's potential that there's not a value called button. And so because if they don't pass in a slot named button, let me show you what will happen. So we click save, refresh. We're going to get an error because there's an undefined variable called button. So what we tried to do here is when we rendered the second component again, the second time, we tried to call the value for button, but button doesn't exist because we didn't pass in a slot for button, so it renders an error, just like it would if you were, say, calling another variable that didn't exist. You would get an error. So one thing to keep in mind here is you would want to set a default in this case. Because we didn't do the if statement to block it out, we would want to set a default. So we can do button or learn more. That'll be our default, okay? So now if there's no value for button, it will fail gracefully and just fall back on this default item here. Whereas if you don't do this default with this or, so you do or, and then that's kind of the default if button doesn't exist. If you didn't do this, then you'll get the error. So this will prevent there from being an error. And the way this works is it will just use the value if there is a value, and if there's not, it'll fall back on the default, which is going to be learn more. So let's go back to our browser, refresh one last time. And here we get the custom value, click like, because we passed in that slot. And this one gets the default value because we didn't pass in a slot for a button. Okay? So there you go, guys. That will do it for components. That's basically all there is to it. So you can get as fancy as you want with these things. Let's say you were doing something like an alert. You would, I don't remember how alerts work. Do you just want to do it real quick? Let's do it. Let's come back up to alerts. Let's see, an alert just looks like this. So let's do an alert component real quick. And then the other thing I recommend, by the way, is, here, let's undo this. Okay, so we got our component alert. The other thing I recommend is maybe you can organize these components however you wish. So you can see here, when I called the component, I just called it Jumbotron. So that means because I just called it Jumbotron, I need to put jumbotron.blade.php in the base of the views folder. And make sure to add the blade.php at the end. Okay, just because you don't put it here, it's still expecting a blade.php. And it's kind of basing it off the root folder, the view folder. Just like all the other stuff, if you did like an include or something like that, it basically works the exact same way. So let's make a folder here called components where we can store all of our components. Let's put Jumbotron up in there. So now inside of components, there's a jumbotron.blade.php. Let's go and make a new one. And this will be called alerts.blade, or just called alert.blade.php. And then this is where we'll paste our alert. Okay. So now when we call this one, obviously just calling Jumbotron would cause an error, right? There's the error because it can't find the Jumbotron view. So what you need to do now is you need to make sure it can find it. So components.jumbotron, components.jumbotron, and now we should be good. So let's save that, refresh. Oh, it's because of down here. So components, forgot to do it down here. There we go. So now it works. Just make sure that you've got all of that in place. So I recommend probably having this components folder where you can put all the components for your project inside of there, just to keep them all separate because it would get too cluttered otherwise. And then you can just have a folder for all your components. And when you're calling components, you could just get used to putting components dot. Or you could do something like, comp or comps or something, whatever you want to do. All right, and let's do one last one for alerts. So let's go to our alert.blade.php. Inside of here, let's go ahead and say we have a title. So we'll call a title if there's a title. And then let's go ahead and wrap all of this inside of an if statement, because if there's no title, we'll just omit it. And then down here, we'll do our slot, okay? That's all we need to do. So we just created an alert component where we could just call an alert. And if we wanted, you could also get fancy. I'm not going to do it here, but you could pass in a dynamic color by customizing this. It would take a little bit more logic, but you would just check to see if it's equal to success or equal to, danger or whatever. And you would just set those here, and then you could customize that as well. So that could be easy. You could also, there's several ways you could do it, but that would be the best way probably. Where you could just do something. In fact, let's just do it. So we'll do alert, and then we'll call it type, and then we'll do the default will be success. So this just so it doesn't break. So the default alert will be success, and unless you change it to do something else, then it will be whatever else. So, but if we forget to submit a type, it'll be success. All right, and if we forget title, it just won't have a title, and then the default content will be always in the middle. So let's take a look at how this works. So let's just delete one of these components because we don't need all of them. And let's now create a component for alert. We got to do component dot alert. There we go. And then we're going to, in this one, we'll do a slot. We'll fill it all out. So we'll do danger. Or sorry, no, we want to do type. That's the name of the slot. The value is danger. And then let's do another slot with the title. And this will say error. And then the extra value will just say we could not process your request. And of course, you could pull all these from a error bag. If you had an error, some type of error variable, you could say error type. And maybe that dynamically fills in the word danger because you filled it in with some sort of error variable. And that's probably the best way you would do it. And that way these components are generated dynamically. But I just want to show you guys, obviously this is the hard-coded way. Could not process your request. All right, so now we went ahead and submitted one. Let's go ahead and take a look at it here in the browser. So there we go. We get error, could not process your request. And you can see we get the danger type. If we go ahead and omit let's just get rid of this completely. No type. And now take a look at it. We're going to get success by default. If we forget about a title, then we're going to not get a title. We'll just get that. So you can see here how we're going to get, it'll always create something. So that's kind of one way that you can create an alert. And so there, with a little bit of work, it was really, really quick, especially if I wasn't talking about it. To type the code out for that component literally took 20 seconds, 30 seconds. It was pretty easy. And so you can now use these components throughout your entire application without having to reduplicate this code custom for all this stuff. And especially when you start getting into elements where you have logic and you're pulling, like I was showing, where you're pulling from like an error bag or some sort of flash message or something like that, where you're trying to dynamically pull the type and dynamically pull all that stuff. Well, now you don't need to have that. You don't need to check on it and do if statements and stuff that are repeated throughout all of your, throughout all of the blade files. You can just have it in one place where you can tweak the logic, like here, to get it the way you want. And then if you ever have an error, a problem with it, you can come back and fix it in one place. And anything that tries to use this component, this alert, or whatever you're trying to, whatever components you create will automatically update with it. So components are definitely a really big feature. This is something that I want to use a lot more of. And of course, don't forget you can do something similar with Vue. So if you're doing this with Vue, I probably, for really basic stuff like this, I'd probably just do the blade ones. But there's also Vue components, and you can always do components with Vue as well. And obviously when you do a Vue component, instead of using the blade syntax, you would do something like, in this case, alert, right? Alert might be, is that a reserved HTML type? I'm not sure. So you might want to namespace it. So you would do something like dev marketer or something alert, right? Or DM, we'll call it DM alert. So you might want to namespace it just so you don't have any problems. But anyway, then you would have a Vue component, and then they've got similar things inside of where you can do variables inside of here to customize it, very similar to how you can with slots. So anyway, it's another very similar way to do it. Vue components and blade components are very, very similar. I kind of think when you're just dynamically filling it, unless you need the JavaScript function, I really like just using the blade components. So anyway, hopefully you guys learned a lot in this video. I think it's super useful. So let me know if you learned something down in the comments below. Hit me up on Twitter @_JA Curtis, JACURTIS. I'd love to hear from you guys. Hey, what's up, guys? I was editing the video and just wanted to chime in and say, I know this video, as I was editing it, I realized that you guys might want the source code for this because I kind of flew through it and the way I zoomed and everything. I figured you guys might want the source code. So I'm not going to upload the entire source code because this is just like a scrap project. It just seems weird to upload this entire Laravel project. You guys are only looking for basically the components. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a gist on GitHub. Gists are like it's like a mini repository, like code snippets, basically. Anyway, there will be a link in the description for a GitHub link. It'll be like gist.github.com/something. And go ahead and click that link if you are interested in the source code. And that'll take you over to GitHub. And on GitHub, I will have the code for the components, what actually goes in your main blade file. And then I'll actually have the 2 different components we made in case you want to use those in your projects, or you want to look at the code a little closer, because I know we flew around and did lots of things in the video. So anyway, if you are interested in the source code, go down below and click the link to GitHub and it will take you there. Let's jump back to finish the videos. Since it's on the back of everybody's mind, everyone's asking if we're going to continue the CMS where I build the dev marketer website. Totally am. We've got 3 more. I think there's going to be 3 more videos in this series in Laravel 5.4 new features. I'll probably get them done tomorrow, and then we can go right back to doing the website, because there's been a lot of times I've wanted to write posts and do some stuff on the website, but I really want to just make the website. So we're definitely going to make the advanced CMS, which is the dev marketer website. That's still coming. Don't worry. I just wanted to get this out of the way first because Laravel 5.4 new features, it's fresh and new and everyone's looking for this content. So I wanted to get it out first because it's more time relevant. If I wait until after that other series, that might be a month from now or 2 months from now when we get done with that whole long series. And if that's the case, then, like Laravel 5.4 is almost done. We're going to be moving to 5.5 or whatever's 6 or whatever's up next. So anyway, wanted to get this done first, and then we're going to go back to that. So maybe this weekend we will get back to the advanced CMS, but lots of questions. I've been getting tons of emails and tweets about it, people wondering because everyone wants to see it. So that's definitely coming. I also did just sign an e-commerce project today, ironically. So we will eventually get to the e-commerce website because I have to do it anyway. So I'm forced to do it for a client. Just signed that today. So that's an official thing. So I've got to make an e-commerce website. And so my goal, with a little convincing, is to be able to basically film it so you guys can see it and see that whole process. We'll make an e-commerce website using Laravel. Okay. That's all I got for you guys today. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm really impressed if you watched to the end of the video. I'll see you guys in the next one.